Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, listeners, and again, anybody who might be watching for the first time. This is our Saturday morning show, and it's Saturday morning with Steve and Dickson. Somebody who's a friend of the show, has been on a few times himself, and now we do this little session every Saturday morning. Unfortunately, he's not looking up to his old usual perky self because he's got a little bit of an infection, but the brave soldier that he is, he's carrying on. So, Steve, welcome again.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning.
Good morning. Beautiful day out. So
another gorgeous Saturday.
Yeah. So if you do have to grimace with pain or anything, don't worry. Okay.
Just to reassure our viewers, the infection or the suspected thing might be is my tooth and nothing else.
Yeah, and apparently it's a wisdom tooth, isn't it?
It's a wisdom tooth.
So it must have been very painful when they inserted those, when they put them in.
When the wisdom was inserted.
Exactly. So fair play to you. Fair play to you for putting up with a pain, my friend. Right, Saturday morning, let's get into it. So, Steve, got a few questions for you today, and a couple of them are really, really valid and sensitive. And for those that are listening, if you want to send any questions in at any time, it's chris@evaint.com. So please feel free to send anything in. But before we get to the questions, how's your week been, Steve?
Good week, busy week. There's been lots happening for us in Skylight this week, but equally a lot of news, a lot happening in the industry. A couple of big events. For me, standout was the Lufthansa EU negotiated or secured bailout. I think almost topping 10 billion euros, which is pretty significant sums. And then also yesterday's news from the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer of the extension of the job retention scheme until October. Although some changes in there as well, but I think certainly some reassuring messages still coming out of government around making sure that those that are affected and businesses that are affected are well supported by the Exchequer. So I think those are a couple of bits of news for me this week that certainly resonated.
Good. Now, obviously, I know for those that look at what's happening with the values of the companies in the aviation sector, there was a huge surge at the beginning of the week, and they've dropped back off again now. But with so many of the names that everybody associates with continuity and being trendsetters within the industry now making redundancies, a very worrying time for people, which obviously is why the furlough system being extended and things like that, and also support is so important. But the redundancy, Steve, now, I'm seeing lots of people, the first and the initial thing that hits them or hits anybody when they're faced with redundancy is, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to support the family? All the pressures and the stresses which add to the anxieties that people have already got with whether or not they may or may not catch the virus and what happens, etc. Tough times for everybody, huh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is obviously having a much deeper impact than we might have sort of thought at the outset when this terrible virus kind of kicked off and made its way across the European shores. I don't think anybody would have forecast the extent to what we're seeing now. And so obviously EasyJet announcing this week 4,500 redundancies. That's on top of numbers like 3,000 at Ryanair, 12,000 or up to 12,000 at British Airways. So I think very, very difficult, very sad, and very worrying times for a lot of people. But I think this is a matter of survival of the fittest, Chris. Really where a lot of question, a lot of debate, in industry and more broadly, because these are big numbers of people losing jobs that gets a lot of public attention as well. I think it is, it's very worrying for a lot of people to see the state of the industry is now in. But the reality is, as I said, survival of the fittest. It means that companies that were very well established or had good liquidity and were solid, viable businesses before this crisis have just had to knuckle down and make these very, very tough decisions that will impact a lot of people personally, a lot of families, and that's very, very sad, of course.
It is. It's terrible. And so many people say, yeah, but these airlines have been making money for so long, and look at their records and look at where their share price stood and how much money. Why didn't they manage it better? which is the other side of the argument. But I think it's important that people, appreciate that it's not just taking advantage of a crisis. In some cases, things have to be done. You have to retrench. You have to then consolidate so that you can decide where's the best strategy moving forward. And things even like aircraft, being early retired, people don't understand why. So what's your take on the retirement principle?
Yeah, and look, this is an interesting point, Chris, because whilst there will obviously be a significant effect across the aerospace industry more generally, as growth slows down, or we won't see growth return, or we won't see the sort of volumes return for the next 2 to 3 years as predicted. But at the same time, airlines have made commitments on new aircraft orders. Those aircraft orders typically will be for next generation aircraft. So looking at things like the 320 family neos. If you're looking at aircraft or airlines up gauging to try and get unit cost advantage, moving from a 320 classic to a 321 neo, immediately gives you a plus 20% unit cost advantage on a seat basis. So I think there is still going to be some transactions that involve older aircraft being retired and swapped out for newer, more fuel efficient, less costly aircraft into their fleets. I think that makes good sense. But look, the reality is a lot of these aircraft were already programmed for retirement, Chris. It's no surprise that British Airways will be accelerating the retirement of the 23 or 24-year-old 747-400s. It's no surprise that Virgin Atlantic are doing the same with their 744 fleet. I think what you will see now is decisions that are already being made to fleets, because fleet decisions and fleet commitments are generally 10-year programs. They're not these aircraft are not switched on and switched off over a 2, 3, 4 year period. When fleet decisions are made, they're generally for the long term. So I think what we're seeing is just reflective of retiring these airframes earlier that would have been the case anyway. Commitment to still take deliveries of some of the newer aircraft to take advantage of the unit cost improvements and the fuel efficiencies, and therefore you will still see some churn through that market, whether it be the aftermarket and the leasing space or from the new acquisition.
Don't you think, Steve, that what's needed now is a lot more communication and information? Because the average person is just looking there and they're saying, well, okay, so they're retiring aircraft that yesterday or last month were flying and there was no problem. And now they're still bringing in new aircraft, but they're making all these people redundant. People can't see the correlation and understand the bigger picture. And even if X amount of aircraft get retired and you don't replace the numbers of aircraft, well, there's certain ratio of crews per aircraft that have to be applied. So that also means a reduction. So I think there's not enough of a storyline being told around the situations that are having to occur. Not that it makes it any more pleasant or any more comfortable for those that are affected, but at least to appreciate and understand the mechanics of the decision making. Yeah,
you look at crew configuration. Let's take an A330 for example. You could operate minimum crew would be 8 on that aircraft. I think a lot of airlines, for service standard reasons, not for minimum crew complement safety requirements, but for service standards, they might normally, Chris, have had 11 or 12 crew on there. You look at something like an A380, which I can't recollect the minimum number of crew on 380, but typically they're around 18, 19 crew. But I've seen airlines with up to 22, 23 crew on 380s. You look at something very efficient like the 787 compared to a 380. Yes, obviously the mass and the volume of customers that are carried is much reduced. Less than half of a 380 is what a 787 can uplift. But you look at the operating costs associated with that, and you look at the crew complement required, and actually you find a very different kind of set of requirements. Therefore, that mean not only is this taking new aircraft is always good, but it's capital intensive. But actually, we're able to get much better efficiency of our people and productivity out of our people based on varying those crew complements. What you'll also tend to see now are some maybe the crew patterns changing, that mean that what would have been a slip before might now be an out and back. That might be that's working crew a little bit harder, but as long as it's done in line with the EASA FTL or equivalent in their jurisdictions, then I think that all makes good and practical sense, because what the books say is possible. A lot of airlines have already been doing already. It might be that a full service carrier chooses to give their crew a slip, but a couple of LCCs are already doing out and backs anyway. So I think I'd be cautious, and I've heard some stuff about it's challenging safety, or it's not insufficient rest, etc., etc. These are all arguments that are used typically when sort of clutching at straws to find alternatives. But it's really important throughout all of this process, this redundancy consultation. Remember, these are not committed, confirmed redundancies. Most of these firms that we've just referenced, Chris, are out to consultation.
Yeah,
and it's really important that people are consulted and are engaged by their employers. But equally, the employee representative groups engage constructively with the employers, and the trade union representatives therefore have got a massive task on their hand, a massive responsibility to ensure that they're having those pragmatic conversations, to protect and preserve as many jobs as practicably possible.
Yeah, and I think those are the words that are important there, because people see that if there's any loss, they see it as a failure. But if it's protecting the longevity of a certain group of people, and possibly to bring things back in again when it ramps up, because in another, 3 years, things will be a lot different than they are today. So the one thing that's important for me is again, the communication, the information, and the support and the reflection of what people have done over a period of time for that particular brand or company. So I think that's really important. Now, there's a few questions that have come in this week, Steve, and one of them, well, two of them actually, are quite relevant. So one of them from a guy called David, he's put, I'm in a group that will be made redundant. I'm 41 years old, 3 children. How do I keep associated with the industry for any future opportunities? So I think he's made it very obvious that, he knows he's going to be gone. I don't know in what sector he's in, but he wants to know, how does he keep it, how does he keep in touch? And I think this is something that the industry could actually do, is if there is certain training, and we know how important training is and keeping up to date with procedures, policies, etc. Even if people left an organisation because of what's happened, it's happened through no fault of their own. I think it would be a great initiative for companies to maintain that contact for a period of, say, 2, maybe even as far as 3 years, whereby they put online certain training and certain information and certain qualifications so that people could keep associated with the industry they love until such time as opportunities come back. And then anybody who did that should be respected for doing it. And if opportunities did come back, they're the first ones that should be brought back. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all, Chris. I think that's a cracking idea. I think what else is, in normal times, pre-COVID, we had this, employers often had this classification as a good leaver, right? These good leavers. So what that would mean was generally that they would be asked back. If they applied again for a job, or that an opportunity came up, and later down the line, years down the line, that they wanted to apply for that gig, then under their previous employment and their exit interview, they've been classified as a good leaver. I don't think it's much different from that, Chris. I think what also is important, therefore, is that there's some level of relationship or conversation that happens along the way. Because I remember, if you remember, after September 11th, which was predominantly, very sad event, of course, and it had global impact, but the impact on our industry was predominantly in North America.
Yeah.
It wasn't as widespread as we're seeing here after COVID. And what happened was, there was tens of thousands of crew, pilots and cabin crew predominantly, and engineers that were furloughed as a result of that the state of the industry after 9/11. But they maintained a link into their employer whether it was sort of proactive or reactive, but there was a link in existing conversations happening there, and I think that's the same here. I don't think that anybody here, this is a very sad time. The extent of the impact has been much more beyond what we'd expected. A lot of people lose their jobs, but there are a lot of good people there, Chris.
Yeah.
We mustn't forget those good people, and those good people are the ones that have carried these businesses, through the good times. I just hope that these businesses also help carry their former employees through the bad times, and that's important. Not in monetary sense, I mean, because that will have to stop, and of course we know the furlough scheme will come to an end at some point, but in making sure that connection still exists. Yeah,
and I think morally, ethically, and just showing some care, it will go a long way. Obviously, it's not gonna change things, but everybody, please God, will get another job, will get a job in something that they enjoy. But if they're given the option that they could return to something that they've loved for so long, I think it's a little bit of comfort at least. Now, second question from Cedric. Why are European countries adapting different measures for return to business? And why have you in the UK taken the 14 days for quarantine, which we both, when we first heard it, said it was absolute bonkers. So in line with Mr. O'Leary, I mean, it's crazy, Steve. So they've still got some days to reconsider and think what they can do about it, but that's crazy.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, we were saying last Saturday I didn't understand the logic, and I'm not sure that I still fully understand the logic. But actually, there's been some more sort of revealed this last few days. But Chris, excuse me, I had a very interesting conversation on Tuesday with a senior cabinet minister, and she was telling me that there was a lot of thought put into this, and that there may well exist some avenues that I think for the Transport Secretary alluded to a few weeks ago about these air bridges. So is it possible that prior to the 8th of June, the quarantine taking effect, is it possible that there might be some air bridges, so connecting UK with a third country that is deemed to be safe, acceptable, whatever, in terms of the R value, the risk, the transmission of the disease, etc. Is it possible that some of those, air bridges will be established prior to the 8th of June?
Yeah.
The answer I didn't get, without divulging the confidential nature of our discussions, but I certainly that wasn't off the table as far as I was made aware. And it's now become clear yesterday that some of these options now have become into the public domain and are being actively discussed. So I think what that means, Chris, is just as we were sort of seeing some green shoots appearing and some helpful progress in business restarting and recovering, what sort of almost had the rug pulled away from underneath their feet, and those green shoots were covered over again, because airlines were planning to restart operations in June. Then they start to get things back online. Then the quarantine was announced, and they said, "Oh bloody hell, this is nonsense." So Michael O'Leary was absolutely right. This seemed idiotic, not only to industry and business, but also to the travelling public. So I think now we will see. I think by the time we have this conversation next Saturday, Chris, I think we should see some more evidence of what those air bridges look like, and I suspect that will be announced this week. I would like to think.
Let's hope so, and let's hope some of those air bridges don't adopt the 14-day quarantine as being best in class. That'd be terrible. Now, Steve, something that was reported in Al Jazeera with Lufthansa and the very large bailout, that they're going to be giving up some slots as a condition of the bailout. And what you're feeling? Do you think that, that's the right thing to do? Because obviously, you've got different organisations potentially getting bailouts and some not. But if the ones who are getting bailouts, then I think at the very least they should have to forfeit certain slots.
Yeah. Look, difficult one, Chris. Airlines are not in this situation for any want of their own or desire. Going to the government, I suspect was the last option, option that Lufthansa had to secure funding. So look, they wouldn't have gone there willingly. I suspect they've gone there in desperate need. So one could look at it two ways. Say, look, actually, Lufthansa's success is its success in its hubs, and particularly in Frankfurt, but also as you well know, being an ex-Lufthansa man,
and proudly so.
Proudly Lufthansa man, but also Munich, Chris, which I think they've done a lot to develop and grow over the last probably 5 or 6 years, more so than before, with a lot of wide body long haul capacity going into Munich.
Yeah.
Right? So of those two hubs, having taken the bailout, again, not for any desire of their own, and then been asked to give up slots in these hubs that they've worked very hard for, that they've had capital that has been, a lot of capital employed in those hubs to make that work in terms of the assets and the aircraft and the people, and establishing their foothold in the markets that they operate to and from. I think it's a bit rich to suggest that Lufthansa should then give up some of their slots, forever. I think that is probably a slight step too far. I think what I think Lufthansa had not objected to was a short-term transfer of those slots to another operator. Because remember, Lufthansa's ability to repay those funds to the German taxpayer is premised on Lufthansa having a viable, solid, robust business going forward. If you start to then chop away sort of their feet from their legs, and they then don't have the ability to run, don't have the ability to make the hubs as efficient or as scalable as they once were, I would question that the interest is lying in a different place, because is this anti-competitive? So if it's a loan on a commercial basis, I'm not sure that's anti-competitive. If it was a government handout and a bailout, just a check thrown into Lufthansa, then different story, Chris. I don't think that's the case. So look, the alternative view is, of course, saying it's anti-competitive and Lufthansa should make some concessions. And there are always these slots that are sort of concessionary when these sort of acquisitions or takeovers happen. But look, the reality is, if you want a slot in Frankfurt in the next 3 years, I suspect it won't be difficult to get one in any case, given the state that we're now in and the slow recovery of our business. So maybe it's a moot point.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's all down to the type and the depth of the communication that comes out with the announcements. So that's important. Right, Steve. Now another one is an interesting one for you. And this is to both of us. This is from Santosh. Do either of you have ideas or suggestions on how to address the new normal? Well, there's an opportunity.
Chris, we've had a few of these before. We've had a stab at this. Look, I think a few key things for me. We'll speak about it again, but it's Santosh. Thanks for the question. I think, look, let's not underestimate the challenge that this blasted virus has given our industry. It is massive, it is deep, and it will be prolonged. I mean, we're not going to come out of this in good shape, for a couple of years to come. What I think that means is that the focus has to change going forward. And I think now what we'll see is a reshaped, a rebalanced, industry that's premised on a good solid proposition, reliable proposition, airlines that have done the right thing to their customers throughout this process.
Should be remembered, yeah.
Be remembered, absolutely. But I think a couple of things, Chris. One is liquidity, cash.
Yeah, cash is king, as we've said many times.
Absolutely, that's going to be important. Second thing is margin matters.
100%. What a lovely term that is.
I think that's really important going forward, and I think a lot of it's not so prevalent here in Europe, but certainly outside in Asia and Middle East, etc. There are some airlines, some unscrupulously so, that are absolutely abusing their government shareholders and distorting competition in the rest of the network and the rest of the markets. I think that is a problem. Yeah. I think what that does is sort of trash the markets for everybody else, and I think that needs to be right-sized and fixed. Not sure how one does that, given sort of the general sort of totalitarian or authoritarian nature of some of those businesses and states.
And on the handling side, Steve, certain little self leveling barometers like cost plus.
Yeah.
People should not be chasing contracts for the sake of share and just consolidation. If it's not making money, you shouldn't be accepting it, and don't do it.
Yeah, and then each station has to stand on its own 2 feet. But when you've got a network of 160 stations, or 200 stations, some of the big ground handlers have got.
Maybe it's too big. Maybe it's too big, Steve.
Maybe they're too big. So look, Chris, I think cash, margin matters, cost plus. I think those things are going to be really important going forward. I think also we shouldn't get too het up about sort of what this. There's a lot of discussion about screening and medical screening and waste management and so on and so forth. I think what we've seen is a pretty quick evolution of some of those requirements. And the early to the carriers that were still flying had some very rudimentary sort of procedures in place. But as we've grown forward, we were mentioning last week Emirates with the sort of the giveaway box, like
the pack, yeah,
a bit like a selection box at Christmas time. You sort of get your mask and your wipes and so on and so forth. I think we've seen some pretty good people adapt to that. But there was a lot of talk at the beginning about health passports and travel clearances and so on and so forth. I don't think the new normal will now actually look like that. I think that's going to be I think there was too much emphasis put on some of those aspects at the early stage, and that, oh God, we'll never fly again without a pre-clearance or health clearance. I don't actually think that's going to be in this new normal. I think there will be once confidence is restored, and these measures are helping confidence be restored in this new normal world. I think that we will largely be devoid of a lot of those requirements that we thought may have been necessary at the outset.
Yeah, so it comes down again to manageable risk, because I've had some people say that on some of the podcasts we were talking about, did C-suite and senior managers and shareholders, did they pay enough attention to QHS S&E, and did they do enough risk assessments? Well, no, most people didn't, but that doesn't mean that now you have to overkill when we come back, but it must be within a manageable risk assessment, and people just need to be a little bit more aware. But the more knowledge and the more communication comes the greater awareness of risk and then how to manage it. And for consumers, they just need confidence so that they can start making their own decisions, which is so important. And I think that's critical.
Yeah.
A lot of legacy waste. This is the time now to get rid of it all, because whether you were a regulator, whether you were a trade body representative, whether you were part of a bigger organization, the amount of waste with initiatives and plans and programs that just wasn't going to bring anything, that now I think there's greater focus. So the new leader needs to be more in today than rather in the strategy period of the next 12 to 18 months. So I think the urgency on doing things that make a difference as of now is going to be a lot more in focus.
Yeah.
Now, what else? Anything else to come up on the magic formula?
I think that'll do for this week, Chris. We won't like to give too much away in one episode,
Don't want to give too much away, and I've seen there was a little pang of pain there as you were.
My tooth is giving me a little bit of jip, as we'd say, yeah.
So I think in the interests of looking after the well-being of Dorian Gray.
Thank you.
Do you know something? This could be the start, mate, of the aging process. Hey, maybe it's coming to you now. Maybe
I was at the chiropractor also this week, Chris. So I've been twice to the chiropractor, and now I need to go and see a dentist. But my dentist wasn't keen on seeing me under lockdown restrictions. So I will muddle on through.
Sure, nobody's got a key to that attic, my friend. Don't want you falling apart over the next few Saturdays. Right, as is normal, and I don't think you're in any fit state now to come up with the domestic tip of the week. I've actually got one, and for those who know me well, they know how good I am at cleaning and doing all the domestic chores. So I've got one here now: how to keep your TV dust free. So basically,
I need to know this.
Pardon?
I need to know that.
Oh, mate, I'll tell you, my family, when they hear me say this, they'll certainly have a chuckle.
I spoke to some of your family this week. Funny enough, your cleaning capabilities didn't come up in conversation with Joe, Chris.
Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, I'll bet. So when dusting your television or Venetian blinds, use a soft cloth that has been dampened with fabric softener, and this will reduce the static that attracts dust.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. I'll be onto that myself.
And I'm sure, just to take away the pain in your cheek there, Steve, if you actually do that now this afternoon, you'll feel so much better.
Thank you,
But
Chris.
listen, on a serious note, as always, thanks for coming on the Saturday.
Pleasure.
To everybody, and especially David. Okay, we always appreciate how difficult things are, and especially at the moment. So nothing that we say is without that compassion in place. And David, whatever happens, good luck, but try and keep associated with all the things that you've been doing well, so that when an opportunity comes back, that you can get straight back into the industry that you love, and the industry that needs people like yourself who care so much.
That's right. Exactly.
So with that, anybody else got any questions, please feel free to send them in again. As I said, chris@evaint.com, and myself and Steve will address it. We thank you for listening and look forward to speaking to you again next week. Steve, thanks very much, mate.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Love the new hairstyle. Love the rough and ready look. And so sorry about your pain in your cheek.
No worries. Thanks, Chris. See you next week.
Thanks, mate. All the best.
Bye-bye.